I just did the Charlemagne the God podcast. I don't know if you saw that.
Breakfast Club.
Yeah. He's the one to whom Joe Biden said, you ain't really black unless you know if you want to vote for me or vote for Trump. I told him the number one social problem in America is what I call the epidemic of fatherlessness.
Yes.
70% of black kids are raised today without a father in the home, married to the mother, up from 25% back in 1965. Now 25% of white kids enter the world without a father in the home, married to the mother. 40% of all American kids do. And the numbers are clear. If you were raised without a father, you're 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. Even Tupac, the rapper, said that, I know that had I had a father in my life, I would have been more confident, I would have been more disciplined. 60% of all the robberies, the shootings, and the homicides in America are committed by black people, often against other black people. The number one cause of preventable death for a white teenager 19 and under is accidents like car accidents or drownings or drug overdoses. The number one cause of preventable death for a black teenager male 19 and under is homicide, almost always at the hands of another black male. A black male 13 to 43 is 13 times more likely to be murdered than a white male, same demo. Now, unless we're prepared to say black people are just genetically inclined to commit more crime, if it isn't the absence of fathers in the home, please tell me what it is, I told him. And he had no response to that. But
didn't he say white supremacy or something crazy like that?
He did.
Yeah.
He suggested that. And I said, here's the problem, racism and poverty.
White supremacy.
Here's the problem with that. In 1940, 87% of blacks lived below poverty. This is before the Civil Rights Act of 64, before the KKK was alive and well, Jim Crow was still alive and well. You didn't have this kind of pathology. So if it's poverty and racism, how do you explain that? It's not. It's because of the breakdown of the family. And this conversation is not being had. That's one of the reasons I ran for president. I knew that I wasn't going to get the nomination, but I hoped that I could get the people running to begin talking about this. And to pat myself on the back, Vivek started talking about it. And even Trump did. He and I had a meeting in Mar-a-Lago about 2-3 months ago, and I mentioned this to him, and he tweeted something about it. So you're right. We straighten that out. Many of the problems that we are complaining about go away. The crime. We have in California, there's been a rash of smash and grabs where a bunch of young people come into a store and steal stuff. Often they're wearing masks so you can't tell what race they are. But when they're not, and when they get busted, most of them tend to be black. I would be more afraid of my father than I would be of getting caught by the police if I got involved in something like that. These kids are afraid of neither. They don't have a father in the home. Cops are demoralized. They're understaffed. They're pulling back. So they're not afraid of either their father or the police. We should be talking about that more, but we're not.
Yeah, they're uncomfortable conversations. And I think that is why ultimately why people avoid it. And I think
that's ultimately why people call me the black face of white supremacy too. Seriously. Yeah. And by the way, when I ran for governor, when the run was over, I went back to radio to fulfill my contract. And I invited the woman who referred to me as the black face of white supremacy to come on my show. Let's have a conversation. Yeah. Tell me what it is I've said or done that makes me the black face of white supremacy. Talking about fatherlessness makes me the black face of white supremacy. Talking about how bad urban school makes me that. Talking about how much crime is committed by young black people, often against other young black people, makes me that. Please tell me. She wouldn't come on.
No. I think a lot of people want to feel good and be perceived by their peers as being a quote unquote good person. Then they actually want to fix the problem. I think there are far too many people, and especially far too many politicians and people in the media, who care more about feeling good and looking good than doing good. And you see this across so many different issues. I mean, I think is it San Francisco, where if you work out the homeless budget per homeless person, it comes out to something like $150,000 per year per person. And you go to that city, you walk around downtown, you walk around the Tenderloin, and you're just like, what on earth are you doing with this money? I mean, if you gave me $150,000 per homeless person to improve their situation, you give me 1 year, they're not still going to be lying out on the street in their own feces with a needle in their arm. That's not even fathomable. For that type of money, I mean, that's way more money than most people even earn. It's more than double what most people earn. So even at a minimum, when it comes to accommodation, like you can't, it's just the incentive structures are so broken. And then you learn more about it, and you learn just like a military industrial complex, there's a whole homeless industrial complex, and there are people who are enriching themselves by keeping the problem alive. And it's just bananas, because then people just say, oh, this is why we need higher taxes. You just need to throw more money at the problem. It's like, guys, I think $150K per person is more than adequate. The problem is that people do not actually want, the people in power do not genuinely want these problems fixed. And that's a sad thing to say, but that's the obvious reality of it.
Well, and we know it can be handled if they want to, because remember when the Chinese premier came to the Bay Area?
Oh my gosh.
All of a sudden the area you're talking about got cleaned up.
I forgot. I'd actually forgotten about that.
And, I drive to work when I was on radio down the street called Forest Lawn Drive. And there were cars on either side, vans, dirty, filthy. You could tell they'd been there for months. People were living in these vans, block after block after block after block. And I'm driving down that street about 2-3 months ago. They're all gone. The street looks like it used to look. Mm-hmm. Somehow, some way, they got solved.
Yeah, and other big cities that are far bigger than San Francisco in some cases, they managed to work it out. They managed to sort it out. And I mean, even if you expand the scope outside the USA and you just look at other developed nations, other big cities, it could be Tokyo, it could be Dubai, it could be Prague, it could be Hamburg, whatever. Like, they don't have this same level of problem. And typically they're not even using as many resources that are dedicated to the problem. I want to shift gears a little bit, Larry. We've talked about the problem with familial breakdown and father absenteeism. And it's a popular talking point on the conservative side of the spectrum because we recognize just how serious it is. But a question remains, how do you actually incentivize it? How do you reverse this decline in family, what would you call it? Family formation and families staying together. How do you bring more fathers back into the picture?
Well, the first issue is to talk about the damage done when you bring a child into the world that you're not prepared to feed, clothe, house, and educate. I think that failing to talk about personal responsibility is a big problem. You are basically giving people a pass for making poor decisions. And no matter how badly you are raised, life still comes down to decisions. My father never knew his biological father. He was born in the Jim Crow South in 1915. His mother was illiterate. She didn't work. She had a series of boyfriends she lived off of. My last name, Elder, is the name of some man who lived in my dad's life longer than any of the other men, maybe 4 or 5 years. My dad began using his name. I'm not even sure he formally adopted my father. So my father comes home at the age of 13. This is in Athens, Georgia. And he starts quarreling with his mom's then boyfriend. She sides with the boyfriend and throws my father out of the house, never to return. He had no money in his pocket. He goes down the road, dirt road, cleaned up barns, cleaned up yards, did anything he could to make a buck. Ultimately became a Pullman porter for the trains. They were the largest private employer of blacks in those days. And this little black boy from Athens, Georgia, was able to travel all around the world and came to a place called California. And it was sunny. People seemed less racist. And my dad was shocked. You could walk in the front door of a restaurant, sit down, and get served. He always had boxes of crackers and 10 cans of tuna with him because he never knew if he'd be able to get a meal in the South. So he made a mental note, maybe someday I'll relocate to California. Pearl Harbor, my dad joined Marines. He was in World War II, stationed on the island of Guam. And he gets out, goes back to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where he married my mom to get him a job as a cook because that's what he did in the military. He was the head of cooking for the colored soldiers because the military was segregated in those days. Goes to a restaurant, and he's told, we don't hire niggers. Went to another restaurant, we don't hire niggers. Goes to an unemployment office. Lady says, you went to the wrong door. My dad goes out in the hall and sees colored only, goes to that door to the very same lady who sent him out. My dad came home to my mom and said, this is BS. I'm going to L.A. where I was before the war. Get me a job as a cook. My dad comes out to L.A., walks around. You don't have any references. You don't have any references. My dad said, I need references to make ham and eggs. I will work for free. Just give me a written reference. I wouldn't do that. Unemployment office, this time just one door. She had nothing. My dad said, what time do you open? She said, 8. What time do you close? 5. My dad said, I'll be sitting in that chair till you find something. My dad sat in the chair for a whole day, came back the next day, sat there until lunch. He calls him up. I have something. I don't know if you're going to want it. Of course I'm going to want it. I'm starting a family. What is it? It's a job cleaning toilets. My dad did that for 10 years in Nabisco brand bread, took a second full-time job cleaning toilets at another bread company, cooked for a family on the weekend because they wanted my mom to be a stay-at-home mom, went to night school to get his GED, and then after getting his GED, went to night school to learn how to operate a small restaurant. Saved his nickels and dime from working 2 jobs as a janitor, started a cafe near downtown L.A., started when he was 47 years old, ran it until his mid-80s, and retired. He owned that building, property next door, plus the little house that we still have in our family. And my dad always told my brothers and me, hard work wins. You get out of life what you put into it. Larry, you cannot control the outcome, but you are 100% in control of the effort. And before you moan or groan about when someone did to you or said to you, go to the nearest mirror, look at it, and ask yourself, what could I have done to change the outcome? And finally, my dad said, no matter how hard you work, how good you are, sooner or later, bad things are going to happen to you. How you deal with those bad things will tell your mother and me if we raised a man. I tell you that story to say, no matter how badly you are raised, you are still have to be responsible. You still should know right from wrong. As to what to do about this problem, short term, all these people need mentors. I liken it to AA, where if you're a recovering alcoholic, you have a sponsor. All these men and women who don't have father figures need one. And I'm urging all the people in my generation, I'm the baby boomer generation, people in my generation have retired or about ready to retire. They're vigorous. They've raised their kids. They've raised their grandkids. They have life experience. They have wisdom. You should make yourself available for all these kids to be able to call you when they need to have a strong, commonsensical voice. I belong to a church called the Calvary Chapel Church. My pastor is Jack Hibbs. We have a mentoring program where literally we go door to door in places like Harlem, offering mentorships to young people who don't have father figures. I was just campaigning in Iowa. I was at a city called Johnson City, 98% white. And I asked the chief of police whether there was a gang problem. He said, there is. Not like Chicago, we have a gang problem. I said, what's the common theme? He said, the common theme is they don't have they don't have a father figure. Not a father, not a grandfather, not a pastor, not a baseball coach, nobody. That's what people need. And I'm urging people to step up and volunteer their time, and if not time, then money for programs. Every city has programs like that. They're all underfunded, understaffed.